So thank you for joining me on this second webinar. And what we'll do
Thanks.
is we'll review the last webinar as we talked about the subconscious a little bit and how the subconscious drives the patterns that we see in our lives. And a lot of these videos are talking about things that are fairly intangible. But as we go along, these videos start to accumulate and the information that is in there starts to compound as well. And over time, you start to draw links between the videos. So one of the key videos that I have is called The Subconscious Revealed. And in it, I talk about how there's 8 levels of information processing that goes on in the brain before information reaches our thinking minds. And part of it, levels 1 to 6, is actually just the subconscious. And at level 6, the subconscious decides which information is relevant to us. So we may be thinking that we have choice about what we think, but instead it's our subconscious that decides what we think. And the subconscious really is governed by just 2 mechanisms. One's fear, and the other one is, I guess, a calm, relaxed state. In science, we call that the sympathetic and parasympathetic states. Depending on which state is active, it shapes the thoughts we have. So when the fear state or the sympathetic state is active, all our thoughts become very linear, goal-directed, strategic. So we start to look at the worst-case scenarios and take a very controlled approach. We start to control things that happen in our lives because we are afraid of change, afraid of things that we cannot control. While in the parasympathetic state, when our body is calm and relaxed, we feel safe, and so we can also have the confidence to think more creatively and be more imaginative, be more fun in our lives. So these are the 2 states that the nervous system understands, and depending on which state you're in, the nervous system also decides what thoughts you have, because you cannot be in a fear state and have fun, imaginative thoughts. Those 2 things cannot coexist. So nervous system that decides. And that's why the last webinar we talked about uncovering what drives the subconscious. So if you need more information on that, you can go and review that seminar as well. But also, as you are here, Ashish, I'd like to hear your comments on that webinar. What you thought about it? Did anything stick or did not stick? Did you apply anything, or was it just information that was interesting but you left it behind?
So yeah, I did remember a few things. I had posted a lot of questions in the chat, but maybe you may not have been able to see those questions because my connection dropped and I had to join in again. So I think those questions might have been lost. But one of the things I remember was you said you lose more weight when you walk rather than run, because when you are running, it's unnatural and your body first burns out all the temporary energy that you have rather than reaching the fats, utilizing the fats. So what I started doing was I started listening to binaural beats. There's an app called Atmosphere. It has these 5 hertz and 6 hertz tones. And when I do that, even when I'm in the train, I feel sometimes stressed out. Like before, I couldn't even figure out that I was stressed, but because of relaxation and meditation, even a slight elevation in my heart rate, my
Mm-hmm.
body can feel that something is, unnatural happening. Not
Mm-hmm.
unnatural, something is not right. So I started walking every day, and I can notice maybe I'm losing some weight, but it's too soon. I can't really say.
Yeah.
There were a few more things which you mentioned. I don't remember everything now, but it's there somewhere in my subconscious, but I can't
Yeah.
recall.
Yeah, I'll just make a comment on the walking as well. And you're right, a lot of this information just goes in and it sits there for a while. And as new information comes along, it updates and we get a greater and greater understanding because these are quite vast concepts and we cannot
Mhm.
understand it in a week or a month or even 2 to 3 years. It takes time for this information to really sink in. But to
Mhm.
go back to walking, there is actually nothing wrong with running. A good example of this is today. I was walking down the street in Bondi, and as I was passing one of the sidewalks, there was a
Mhm.
man who was standing in the middle of the sidewalk, and he wasn't aggressive, but he was twitching a lot and quite unnaturally. And I didn't know what was going on for him at that point. But as I was passing, uh, I found that as I passed him, I felt his eyes behind my back, and suddenly my walking pace increased. And
Mhm.
immediately I was like, wow, like now my nervous system is walking from a state of fear rather than the calm, harmonious state it was walking from. And immediately, because it was such a instantaneous increase in my pace, I just decelerated myself back into
Mhm.
a slower walking pace, one that is walking with harmony rather than rushing and escaping. So
Mhm.
that that was a very obvious difference between walking with harmony and rushing. So it's not so much uh, how you walk or what speed you walk in, or it's more the intention behind it. So
Mhm.
if you're walking by mentally pushing yourself, then you're forcing your nervous system to do things that it feels is quite corrosive on the body. You can run and still soften your body to the impact. And that is a more intelligent way of running than simply pushing yourself so hard and you're exhausted mentally, physically. And so many runners have destroyed their ankles, their knees, because they've pushed themselves so hard because of the initial euphoria. It makes them drop out of their minds, but the longevity isn't there because they have abused their body for so long. So
Mhm.
uh, that is adding to the long-term sustainability of your movement. And there are tribes out there. For example, the Tarahumara tribe. They are 1% of the Rahamuri tribe of Northwest Mexico, and they run the equivalent of 2 or 3 marathons per week, and they do it to chase down animals, and
Mhm.
they outrun it over time. And even their aging population, the grandfathers, the grandmothers are still keeping up with the young hunters, and they don't have any.
Because the intention is the different. Intention is different. Is that right?
Yes, so they're doing it in a more enjoyable way.
Mm.
They understand that the body uh, is not something that is immune to abuse. The way
Mm.
we treat the body is a reflection of how well it functions as well. So yeah, it's quite a powerful way of working with nature, because the more we are in harmony with ourselves, the more we are in harmony with whatever is around us as well. So any bumps or turbulence that we find in the environment, we can adapt to that much more quickly if we are in harmony with ourselves. Because these Tarahumara runners, they don't just run on a footpath or a straight line. They are actually running through canyons, and it's quite a challenging territory even for marathon runners. So it's quite remarkable how much the body can adapt to even the most stressful environments, provided you are supporting the nervous system, supporting the body at the same time. And this actually leads into what I want to discuss in this webinar, because a lot of what I want to talk about is our mental health. Our mental health is suffering crucially, especially at this time, because so much of our workforce is disengaged, and that's where we spend so much of our lives. So because we have lost touch with our own bodies, lost touch with our own nervous systems, when it comes to feeling emotions, for example, we don't want to get into an emotional confrontation because we don't yet know how to manage our own emotions. So we have instead diluted emotions out of workplaces. And for a lot of employees, their internal struggles goes unnoticed. And the cataclysmic effect of this is that I'm not saying this is linked to workplace, but if we just consider the fact that more than 50% of the people who are in government-funded aged care right now in Australia, they have dementia. And that is a very staggering statistic, because these were the high performance working class, or the working class that was of the previous generation. And now they are suffering quite a bit mentally, and it affects families, it affects the grandchildren, it affects everyone who is involved with taking care, because there's so much money and resources that go to the aging population. So we are not really looking after ourselves, even with the current population. So many people are so embarrassed by the fact that they have some form of mental struggle, whether it be anxiety, depression, insomnia. We hide that because through social media, we see that everyone's lives looks perfect, and we only post the good things, and we feel quite ashamed, quite embarrassed to really share our struggles. But it's in our struggles that we actually unite, because that's when we open up, it allows others to help us as well. And that's a beautiful way to connect with people as well, not as a victim, but as being vulnerable. So this is something that has been almost phased out of workplaces, and we are sometimes harsh with our employees, or we are so cold because we want the work to be done, and we think by pushing ourselves we can be more productive. But instead, if we are not looking after our own mental health, we are actually being counterproductive. We're actually sucking the juice out of our creativity. We are preventing ourselves from being the full expression of who we are. So we deny ourselves so much by struggling, by forcing ourselves to do things, when we can do far better in such a short amount of time without the struggle. So a lot of what I'm talking about is really information and knowledge, but knowledge by itself doesn't really do anything. We have to be able to have a deeper sense of appreciation, because once we understand how the body is functioning, we then have a deeper appreciation of it, and then the awareness arises for us to be able to harness its full potential. Because if you're not aware of what the body is capable of, we might not even know what we are aiming at. So knowledge provides a little bit of information, but then once the awareness is there, it's our own responsibility to take that knowledge, challenge that knowledge, and start our own investigation and start learning about ourselves, because ultimately it all comes back to us. We have to be the ones who take the responsibility. So today what I'm going to share with you is the 5 main brain networks that govern our human brain. And once you understand these networks, you gain a deeper appreciation for how the brain works, because for many people, the brain is quite a mysterious organ. Unlike other organs like the stomach, which digests food, the heart, which pumps blood, the brain is quite an enigma. And if you haven't studied neuroscience, it's quite a misleading structure, because everyone wants to tell you about the brain, about what's happening in their minds, but no one really takes the time to understand how it works. So this webinar, I will show you how the brain is connected, which will give you a deeper appreciation of how it works. And you'll understand why sometimes I say that doing meditation is not enough, or doing yoga is not enough. Some of these practices are there because people think it's good for their well-being, but if you understand the brain much more deeply, you realize that to create real shifts in the nervous system, you have to go far deeper than just yoga and meditation and prevalent fitness practices. So in this webinar, we'll go into how the brain works. And the way I'll do this is I'll take you into a program which shows you the different wiring of the brain. So in the brain, we have 2 things, or 3 different tissue types. The first is cerebrospinal fluid. It's the fluid that keeps the brain from being crushed by the skull. And it's like synovial fluid, which protects the joints. The other 2 tissues of the brain is the gray matter and white matter. The gray matter is all the brain structures. So it is the what we call the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, the hippocampus. All these different brain structures are gray matter. What connects these brain structures together is what we call white matter, and it is the information highways of the brain. So in this talk, what I'll show you is how this information highway looks like, and what are the major pathways of the brain. So I'm going to use a neuroscience software, which you'll see on screen now. And so do you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I can see it.
So what I'll do is just change a few things. So basically what you see here is all the white matter structures of the brain. It actually looks like someone's had a very bad hair day. But if I just orient this structure, out here is the front of the brain. This is the back of the brain. If I rotate it, this is the left hemisphere and this is the right hemisphere. This image is color coded, so it shows if you're looking head on into the brain. Red is in the x-axis, which is going from left to right or right to left, so traveling horizontally. Green is in the y-axis and it's traveling from the front to the back of the brain, so it's traveling laterally. And then we have blue, which is from the top to the bottom of the brain. So X, Y, and Z axis is color coded, and in medical sense, we call the x-axis the sagittal plane, the y-axis coronal, and the z-axis axial planes. So this is what all the wiring in the brain looks like, and it's actually a huge mess until we start organizing this. So the way I'll do this is I'll tell you what these brain networks are. And I'll start with a major network, which I call the colossal fibers, the fibers that run bilaterally in the brain that connects the two hemispheres. So in order to do that, what I'll do is I'll change the picture a little. If I do that, I can select just the part of the brain that I want. So this is a beautiful software to look at how the brain is functioning. So now we are seeing a small part of the brain. And if you see that red area there, that is what we call the corpus callosum, and links the left hemisphere and right hemisphere together. And at this point, I'd like to just say that there's no such thing as left brain or right brain. Instead, we have hemispheric dominance. So moment to moment, it changes which hemisphere is active depending on what we're doing. So for example, if we are playing music, it activates both right and left hemispheres. You need the time code and you need to understand the structure of music. The logical side of music is processed by the left hemisphere, while when you let go and you're truly immersed in the music and you are working through an imaginative way, you're using the right hemisphere of the brain, which is creative. And the interaction between these two hemispheres is crucial. So that is the first level of integration that we see, is the hemispheric integration, left brain and right brain. So that's one of the networks. What I'll do is I'll start over, and we'll go through the brain structures again. Just adjusting what we see. So this is the brain again. This time we see what we call fractional anisotrophy, which is not something I want to explain right now, but we can go over that, which is actually too much detail to talk about right now. Now what I'll show you is what we call projection fibers. And these are fibers that run from the top of the brain, the frontal lobe, to the back of the brain. Let's see if I can change the fibers. Okay, that's better. So what I'm showing you here is how the brain is connected from front to back. So this is the front of the brain, this is the back. And you see a lot of green fibers traveling through the brain. So this is connecting the frontal lobe, and it's going right through and connecting to the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe of the brain is our sensory part of the brain. It integrates all our sensory information, sound, visual, smell, all of this information is integrated in the parietal lobe. And the front of the brain is responsible for our thinking, our time-based thinking when we're making decisions or planning and so forth. So whatever the environment is feeding us and whatever we're thinking, depending on our memory, our emotion, it's all integrated through what we call projection fibers, which are seen here in green and going from the front part of the brain to the back part of the brain. So that's the second fiber we're looking at. And this one in particular, which is traveling from the frontal cortex to the parietal cortex, it's what we call the superior longitudinal fasciculus. So that's, all these fibers are named as well. We don't have to remember those names, but in neuroscience, it's much more easier to understand the labeling of these fibers. And the third fiber that we can look at is what we call projection fibers. So activating this box again, the projection fibers actually go from the top of the brain and connect it with the base of the brain. So now we're looking at the right hemisphere. I'll change this image around. So you see these blue fibers running from the base of the brain. It's traveling all the way up to the top of the brain. Right here is the primary sensory and primary motor cortices. And so information is traveling from our nervous system and going into primary sensory motor cortices. So what we feel, the motor commands we generate is all done through these fibers. So it's traveling from top to bottom. So it's shown in blue. So we've seen the red fibers, which is connecting back to front between the hemispheres, so connecting left and right hemispheres. We've seen the green fibers, which are connecting the front to the back of the brain, and now we're looking at the blue fibers connecting the top to the bottom of the brain. So those are the sensory motor fibers. And something that is quite difficult to see is the smaller fibers. So in order to see that, we will make this box a lot smaller. And down here, you'll see that, oops, lost it. Let's try this again. Activate. So these smaller fibers that are traveling in different planes, they are connecting our limbic networks, and these are the emotional networks of the brain. And it might be connecting, say, the amygdala with the hippocampus, and that's a very small connection. And that particular fiber is called the uncinate fasciculus. And so these are the smaller fibers that are doing very small connections between structures rather than connecting massive lobes together. So that's the fourth type of brain fiber. The last one that I'm going to show you is actually what we call the brain stem fibers. And this is what is most interesting because unlike all the other fibers, which are traveling either between hemispheres and between the different lobes of the brain, the brain stem fibers actually connect to the entire brain. So I'll show you that as I bring this box down. So the brain stem is down here. And if I bring the bundle box down here, you can see that it is connected to most of the brain.
Yeah.
And so the brainstem fibers actually go everywhere. And so if part of the brainstem is activated, it actually sends a shock wave throughout the brain. One of the structures in the brainstem is called the locus coeruleus. And whenever it is activated, it gives a shock wave to the brain, signaling that there's a danger present. So the brainstem is often responsible for global changes in the brain rather than localized changes. And that is a crucial point there. So that is all talking about the different brain fibers and how they interact. The key point I'd like to make is that for the brain to work in a harmonious sense, all these fibers need to be working synergistically. And we can monitor this through EEG. So the technology we just before is called diffusion tensor imaging. EEGs go on your brain as a cap, and then we can measure surface brain activity. And we find that when there's synchrony among different brain networks, we call it gamma synchrony or neural binding. And when this neural binding is quite high, we can then talk about it as being in the zone or being in flow, because all the neural networks are working synergistically together for this moment. And that is a very powerful way to engage. Oftentimes we find that our neural networks are struggling between each other, so our emotions might be competing with our rational thinking, or we find that we are losing our sensory motor coordination. So these are situations where the brain networks aren't really communicating with each other. So that is a crucial point that I'm making, is that for the brain to work harmoniously, all these different brain networks have to work synergistically together in this moment. So that is that's why I showed you how the brain is connected. Now I'd like to talk about how to apply this knowledge, because it is very interesting, but at the same time we can't use this information if we don't have tools and techniques to then apply it. So now we're going to talk about how to apply this information. So I have 5 ways that I use to integrate all my neural networks so that they work in harmony together.